weekend on May 7th, 1915, when a torpedo fired by German U-boats sunk the ship, killing nearly 12,000 of the 19,059 people on board, precipitating the United States' entry into World War I. That same year, Cunard unveiled its two magnificent liners. J. Bruce Ismay, chief executive of the White Star Line, discussed the construction of three large ships, with William J. Peary, chairman of the shipbuilding company Harland and Wolff. Part of a new Olympic class of liners, each ship would measure 882 feet in length and 92 feet at their broadest point, making them the largest of their time. In March of 1909, work began in the massive Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Ireland, on the second of these three ocean liners, Titanic, and continued non-stop for 2 years. On May 31st, 1911, Titanic's immense hull, the largest movable man-made object in the world at the time, made its way down the slipways and into the River Logan in Belfast. More than 100,000 people attended the launching, which took just over a minute, amazingly, and went off without a hitch. The hull was immediately towed to a mammoth-fitting outdock where thousands of workers would spend most of the next year building the ship's decks, constructing her lavish interiors and installing the 29 giant boilers that would power her two main steam engines. Now, according to some hypotheses, Titanic was doomed from the start by a design that many lauded as state-of-the-art. The Olympic-class ships featured a double bottom and 15 watertight bulkhead compartments, equipped with electric watertight doors that could be operated either individually or simultaneously by a switch on the bridge. It was these watertight bulkheads that inspired Shipbuilder magazine, in a special issue devoted to these Olympic liners, to deem them practically unsinkable. But the watertight compartment design contained a flaw that was a critical factor in Titanic's sinking. While the individual bulkheads were indeed watertight, the walls separating the bulkheads extended only a few feet above the waterline, so water could pour from one compartment to the next, especially if the ship began to list or pitch forward. The second critical safety lapse that contributed to the loss of so many lives were, as we all know, the inadequate number of lifeboats carried on the Titanic. Just a mere 16 boats, plus 4 Engelhart collapsibles, could accommodate just 1,178 people. Titanic could carry up to 2,435 passengers, and a crew of approximately 900, brought her capacity to more than 3,300 people. As a result, even if the lifeboats were loaded to full capacity during an emergency evacuation, there were only enough available seats for 1/3 of the people on board the Titanic. While unthinkably inadequate by today's standards, Titanic's supply of lifeboats actually exceeded the British Board of Trade's requirements. Can you believe it? Titanic created quite a stir when it departed after its maiden voyage from Southampton, England on April 10th, 1912. After stops in Cherbourg, France, which I'm sure I said world's most celebrated ship. Many of these souls were high-ranking officials, wealthy industrialists, dignitaries, and celebrities. First and foremost was the White Star Line's managing director, J. Bruce Ismay, accompanied by Thomas Andrews, the ship's builder from Harlan and Wolfe. Absent was financier J.P. Morgan, whose International Mercantile Marine Shipping Trust controlled the White Star Line, and who had selected Ismay as company officer. J.P. Morgan had planned to join his associates on the Titanic, but he had canceled last minute when some business matters had delayed him. The wealthiest passenger aboard Titanic was John Jacob Astor IV, heir to the Astor family fortune, who had made waves a year earlier by marrying 18-year-old Madeline Talmadge Force, a young woman 29 years his junior, shortly after divorcing his first wife. Other notable passengers included the elderly owner of Macy's, Isidore Strauss, and his wife Ida, industrialist Benjamin Guggenheim, accompanied by his mistress, valet, and chauffeur, and widow and heiress Margaret Molly Brown, who would earn her nickname the Unsinkable Molly Brown by helping to maintain calm and order while the lifeboats were being loaded and boosting the spirits of her fellow survivors. The employees attending to the collection of first-class luminaries were mostly traveling second class, along with academics, tourists, journalists, and others who would enjoy a level of service and accommodations equivalent to first class on most other ships. But by far the largest group of passengers was the third class, more than 700 people, exceeding the other two levels combined. Some of them had paid less than $20 to make the crossing. It was third class that was a major source of profit for shipping lines like the White Star Line, and Titanic was designed to offer these passengers accommodations and amenities superior to those found in the third class on any other ship of that era. So, Titanic's departure from Southampton on April 10th was not without some oddities. A small coal fire was discovered in one of her bunkers, an alarming but not uncommon occurrence on steamships of that day. Stokers hosed down the smoldering coal and shoveled it aside to reach the base of the blaze. After assessing the damage, the captain and chief engineer concluded it was unlikely that it had caused any damage that could affect the whole structure, and the stokers were ordered to continue controlling the fire at sea. According to a theory put forth by a small number of Titanic experts, the fire became uncontrollable after the ship left Southampton, forcing the crew to attempt a full-speed crossing. Moving at such a fast pace, they were unable to avoid the fatal collision with the iceberg. I don't know how I feel about that. Another unsettling event took place when Titanic left the Southampton dock. As she got underway, she narrowly escaped a collision with the American Line's SS New York. Superstitious Titanic buffs sometimes point to this as the worst kind of omen for a ship departing on her maiden voyage. On April 14th, after 4 days of uneventful sailing, Titanic received sporadic reports of ice from other ships. But she was sailing on calm seas under a clear, moonless sky. At about 11:30 p.m., a lookout saw an iceberg coming out of a slight haze dead ahead, and then rang the warning bell and telephoned the bridge. The engines were quickly reversed and the ship was turned sharply, so instead of making direct impact, the Titanic seemed to graze along the side of the iceberg, sprinkling ice fragments on the forward deck. Sensing no collision, the lookouts were quite relieved. They had no idea that the iceberg had a jagged precious hours before Titanic was plunged into the sea, nearly every lifeboat will be launched woefully underfilled, and some of them with only a handful of passengers. Now, in compliance with the law of the sea, women and children boarded the boats first. Only when there were no women and children nearby were men permitted to board the lifeboats. Yet many of the victims were in fact women and children, the result of disorderly procedures that failed to get them in the boats in the first place. Exceeding Thomas Andrews' prediction, Titanic stubbornly stayed afloat for close to 3 hours. And those hours witnessed acts of craven cowardice and extraordinary bravery. Hundreds of human dramas unfolded between the order to load the lifeboats and the ship's final plunge. Men saw off their wives and children. Families were separated in the confusion, and selfless individuals gave up their spots to remain with their loved ones and allow a more vulnerable passenger to escape. In the end, 706 people survived the sinking of the RMS Titanic. The ship's most illustrious passengers each responded to the circumstances with conduct that has become an integral part of the Titanic legend. Aimee, the White Star managing director, helped load some of the boats and later stepped into a collapsible as it was being lowered. Although no women or children were in the vicinity when he abandoned the ship, he would never live down the ignorance of surviving the disaster while so many others perished. I don't even know if ignorance is the right word there. Infamy, maybe. Thomas Andrews, Titanic's chief designer, was last seen in the first-class smoking room, staring blankly at a portrait painting of a ship on a wall. Astor deposited his wife Madeline into a lifeboat, and remarking that she was pregnant, asked if he could accompany her. He was refused entry, and he managed to kiss her goodbye just before the boat lowered her away. Although offered a seat on account of his age, Isidore Strauss refused any special consideration, and his wife Ida would not leave her husband behind. The couple retired to their cabin and perished together, which breaks my heart. Benjamin Guggenheim and his valet returned to their rooms, changed into their formal evening dress, emerged onto the deck, and he famously declared, "We are dressed in our best, and we are prepared to go down like gentlemen." Molly Brown helped load the boats, and she was finally forced into one of the last to leave the Titanic. She implored its crewmen to go back for survivors, but they refused. They feared that they would be swamped by desperate people trying to escape the sea. Titanic, nearly perpendicular and with many of her lights still aglow, finally dove beneath the ocean surface at about 2:20 a.m. on April 15th, 1912. Throughout the morning, Cunard's Carpathia, after receiving Titanic's distress call at midnight and steaming full speed while dodging their own ice floes all night, rounded up all of the lifeboats, containing only the 706 survivors. At least 5 separate boards of inquiry on both sides of the Atlantic conducted comprehensive hearings on Titanic's sinking, interviewing dozens of witnesses and consulting many maritime experts. Every conceivable subject was investigated, from conduct of the officers and crew to construction of the ship. Titanic conspiracy theories abound, and while it has always been assumed that the ship sank as a result of the gash that caused the bulkhead compartments to flood, various other theories have emerged over the decades, including the ship's steel plates were too brittle for the near-freezing Atlantic waters, the impact caused rivets to pop, and that the expansion joints failed, among other things. evidence explains the electrifying impact that Titanic's sinking had on the public when she was lost. There were widespread disbelief that this ship could not have possibly sunk, and due to the era's slow and unreliable means of communication, misinformation abounded. Newspapers initially reported that the ship had collided with an iceberg but remained afloat, and that it was being towed to port with everyone on board. Can you imagine? It took many hours for accurate accounts to become widely available, and even then, people had trouble accepting that this paragon of modern technology could sink on her maiden voyage, taking more than 1,500 souls with her. The ship historian John Maxone Graham has compared the Titanic story to the Challenger space shuttle disaster of 1986. In that case, the world reeled at the notion that one of the most sophisticated inventions ever created could explode into oblivion, along with its crew. Both tragedies triggered a sudden collapse in confidence, revealing that we remain subject to human frailties and error, despite our hubris and a belief in technological infallibility. Thank you so much for joining me for this video. As I said, I have plans for 2 other ones. And if you're still listening, they will be survivor stories from the Titanic and ghost stories from the Titanic, which I am extremely thrilled to share with you. Please let me know if you've enjoyed this video down below. I would love to have your suggestions on what you would like to see covered in our ASMR Archives series.